Hey cherubs, welcome to this Tea and Tarot episode. I'm very happy to be back with another one. During Tea and Tarot I tend to sling cards and sip tea because that is just basically my default setting, and you might notice that there are some weird noises in this episode, and that is because there is an almighty gale on the east coast today and everything is just very windy outside. My building is shaking and it's quite a sturdy old building, but it really is like buckling under the pressure of the wind. So if you hear anything a bit creepy and ghostly, it's just basically my house trying to blow away over the channel. I know that the last time I did a Tea and Tarot episode it was about chaotic energies and 2019 just being totally foobar, and obviously as you can see from the title of this one I'm talking about burnout, you know, stress, fatigue, and you're probably thinking, wow, Tea and Tarot has really taken quite a dark and miserable turn, Kellyanne. But I promise you that the next one will be really happy-go-lucky. I'm going to look at something like how to have more fun, how to connect with your inner child, something like that. But I wanted to focus on the themes of burnout, exhaustion and stress and pressure because they're very relevant to me over the last few months. I've definitely been dealing with illness, dealing with an injury flare-up, dealing with personal issues and lots of big changes, lots of unexpected things happening, and trying to just basically maintain my sense of stability and keep things moving business as usual, and it's been very difficult for me. And so I feel like I'm drawing these cards just as much for me as I'm drawing them for anybody out there who might need this right now. There are those times in life, aren't there, chickens, when everything just hits you at once and you feel like you've only just gotten over one hurdle and dealt with one thing, and then another thing comes along, and then on top of that you might have messed up biorhythms, you might not be sleeping properly, you might be finding that you're trying to sleep but it's not really happening for you, so you're dealing with overtiredness, and then on top of it you can't really be rested because you've got so much on your mind. I know that lots of people that watch me deal with things like chronic pain, mental health issues at times, and you know, lots of different variables coming in. I've got lots of young parents that watch me, parents of young children, just lots of different things coming in and challenging you and testing you. And this Tea and Tarot episode is for anybody who's feeling like they are really in the thick of it at the moment. They are in the trenches and dealing with lots of different things coming at them at once. As always, chickens, I do have a cup of tea on the go. Today it is a cup of peppermint, and as I always say about peppermint, it might be basic, but it's also classic. And there is a Venn diagram between those two things, darling. So before we write something off as basic, let's always check, is it in the middle bit between basic and classic? Because if it is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Let's not get rid of it, darling. It smells absolutely invigorating, but it's still just a little bit too hot to drink at the moment. But I actually had a cup earlier. This is my second cup of the day. I'm on a little bit of a peppermint thing at the moment, guys. Okay, so the deck I want to use for our Tea and Tarot episode today is going to be the Dust II Onyx Tarot by Courtney Alexander. It does come in a really lovely, decorative, beautiful box, but I took it out of the box because it's quite cumbersome in my tarot area when it's in the box, and as you can see these cards are quite sizable anyway, so I've just got it in a little organza bag. Predictable, again, it's basic but it's classic. Who doesn't have a little collection of organza bags if they're a tarot reader or a witch? And there's a Venn diagram between those two things as well, where all the organza bags live forever. So I really love the Dust II Onyx Tarot. I think it's utterly beautiful. It's so bloody gorgeous, and I must admit that when I first received it and started playing with it, I had what can only be described as a series of spiritual experiences when I first started really bonding with this deck. I just felt that I'd seen some of these images before. There was a familiarity there. There was a real sense of warmth there at the way that these archetypes have been interpreted, and the colours are amazing, the deck quality is mesmerising. Guys, check out Dust II Onyx Tarot, it's utterly beautiful. I do have an unboxing of the Dust II Onyx Tarot deck on my channel, an unboxing video, and I will leave that in the down bar for you if you want to check it out too. There are going to be cutaways of each of the 3 cards that I'm going to be drawing for this Tea and Tarot episode, so do be aware that I do give close-ups of the cards if you want to see some of the finer detail, some of the things that are going on. Also do be aware that with Tea and Tarot we are always looking looking at a general reading. It is not intended to be specific to anybody because it is not being given specifically to anybody. So what I usually do is encourage you to take what resonates with you, think about where the messages might apply to you, and use the messages as much as you can, sort of taking into account what you're going through, and always remembering that I don't know what you're going through. So you've got to keep that in mind as well. I am not sure what you're going through as an individual, so I'm giving the messages out in a general way, and I'm hoping that as many different messages are going to land in a positive way as possible. Please do use the comments section down below to let me know any other interpretations you had of any of the cards. Let me know the cards that you really enjoyed. Let me know a little bit about your own story and where you are with burnout and fatigue and all that jazz. And also, don't be afraid to talk to each other in the comments. Don't be afraid to reply back and forth to each other. If you read something and you empathize with what somebody else has been going through, if you have any tips, any tricks, any help, please don't be afraid to give it. You know, sometimes the comments section can be a really good breeding ground for that kind of positive stuff to be offered. As always with tea and tarot, it's now time to give the deck a little bit of a shuffle. I very much enjoy shuffling the Dust II Onyx because it is very, very high quality cardstock. It is certainly more card than it is paper, but the cards are just the right size. Even though they're rather large cards, they're just the right size for me to hold them long ways in my little hands, and I do find them therefore very satisfying to shuffle. It's not too hard, this cardstock. It's not like I've really got to strain my hands to get the bend, but the bend is never going to be a problem because the cardstock is just really delicious. And look at all the gold. I mean, you can't go wrong really, can you, with this? It's so aesthetically pleasing. Haven't done that all day. Feel better already. Oh dear. Predictable. So the first of the three cards that I'm going to be drawing for this tea and tarot episode about overwhelm, stress, pressure, burnout, that kind of thing, is what could be contributing to it, what kinds of things could be exacerbating it. Sometimes it's very difficult to figure out what might be triggering it, or what you might be able to decrease or avoid that is actually putting more of a strain on you and actually contributing to the problems even further. So I thought card number one, it might be a really good idea to look at what comes through on this and see whether or not we can gather any useful information that will help us to tap into what it is we could be avoiding, decreasing, watching out for. I think sometimes we actually dive straight into the shark tank without realizing it. We are surrounded by triggers and unhelpful things. We're surrounded by certain relationship dynamics, scenarios, conversations, bad habits, decisions that we keep making that really are further exacerbating our tendency to feel stressed or overwhelmed or exhausted. So let's draw the first of the three cards and see what kinds of ideas we can receive from it about things we might want to avoid or watch out for. And the first of the three cards that's come through is the Shaman. The Shaman. And ordinarily in a tarot deck, this is the High Priestess, but in the Dust II Onyx tarot, it has been renamed the Shaman. And the colours here, the facial expression, the jewellery, everything is just so intense, so evocative. I really do love this particular card so much. As I'm looking at this card and tapping into the meaning of this card in relation to what kinds of things might be triggering or exacerbating the issues of stress and overwhelm, I'm thinking about how we can separate ourselves from spiritual practice, and we can convince ourselves that spiritual practice always has to be the last thing on the list. So if we're very overworked, if there's a lot going on, if we feel like there's 100 things to do, loads of different things that we need to think about and focus on, we convince ourselves that spiritual practice needs to take a very, very low priority, and that we simply just do not have any time for it. And I've had this conversation over and over again with various clients, and I've also had it with myself a number of times. And it's funny because if you create just a small space for a spiritual activity of some kind to occur, you actually find that you can deal much better in a lot of cases with the challenges that come up through the day. But what happens is that the cognitive mind, let's say the more rational side of the mind, says, well, if I take this 20-minute meditation out of the day, then I'm going to have 20 minutes to do something else. But actually what tends to happen is that you have deprived your mind of that lovely little window of space and mindfulness and just calm in the storm. And you've deprived yourself of a vital part of a psycho-spiritual self-care routine. So whereas you tell yourself that you're giving yourself more time and that's going to lower your stress level and it's going to decrease your sense of overwhelm, usually what happens is that it does increase. Check in with your journey right now. Check in with how you think and feel about this. Have you been one of those people that's told yourself that spiritual practice needs to be cut out if you ever have too much on your plate because it is expendable? It is not essential. It is not something that is non-negotiable. It's something that can be put to the side. And have you found upon making that decision that actually you've started to become even more stressed and even more overwhelmed because you don't have one of those important havens and one of those important self-care tactics that can actually make you feel more strengthened and more stabilized to deal with your challenges? I think this is something that a lot of people cope with, especially when they are solo practitioners and the people around them in their lives or in the society they inhabit might not necessarily understand a solo practitioner's journey. So it's hard for somebody with a solo witchy practice or a solo spiritual practice of any kind to always feel legitimate in that practice and to always feel that they are allowed to factor that practice into the equation. I think it's much easier for somebody that is under the umbrella of a major dominant religion to find people around them who understand that they cannot just cut out their spiritual practice. They can't just say, oh, well, I'm not going to go to mosque today, or I'm not going to go to synagogue, or I won't go to church because I need to have this time. I'm not going to go to prayer group. I'm not going to go to Bible study because I need this time. I think people under the umbrella of major religions have other people who also can say, well, yeah, obviously that's non-negotiable. I need to do that. And that's helpful for me. And that's something that I take seriously. When you're a solo practitioner, it's almost often as though you feel like you're not legitimate in deciding that your spirituality still needs to have a place of priority. And yes, of course, you're not always going to be able to do the maximum that you can do spiritually. You're not going to want to spend an hour in ritual if you've got lots of things on your plate or if you're stressed because of illness or injury. But I think cutting spiritual practice out of the equation completely under the illusion that it will somehow make you feel less stressed and give you more time, that's exactly what it is. It is an illusion, because often you require that spiritual practice in order to feel calmer and more stable and stronger for dealing with your challenges. This is kind of reminding me of that Zen Buddhist quotation that does the rounds on the internet from time to time that says meditate every single day for 20 minutes, and if you can't meditate for 20 minutes then you need to meditate for an hour. And basically really what that means is if you've gotten to the point where you convince yourself you don't have 10 minutes or 20 minutes for a short and sweet practice that's going to give you so much, then perhaps you need to really stop what you're doing and reassess very deeply how you're spending your time and where you're placing your focus, because if you don't have 20 minutes maybe you need to give it a fucking hour. And I think that is a very appropriate quotation for what's come through here with the shaman card. I also want to lean into another one of the meanings for the shaman, and that is the use of your intuition, the listening to your inner voice, understanding what it is that needs to happen next, coming from your instinct and coming from the depths of you rather than coming from any cognitive concerns that you might have or any egoic drive that you might have. So for instance, you might really feel that you have to get XYZ thing done and you have to be on top of everything and you have to make sure that you don't drop the ball on anything and you've got to keep all the plates spinning. But that's really an ego drive that comes from wanting to impress others or not disappoint others, or it comes from wanting to be able to carry out the things that you said you would do. But if you listen to your intuition, if you go into the depths of self and you really listen to what is being said deep in the drumbeat at the center of you, you might find that what that deep voice, that deep drumbeat is telling you is that you've got to slow down, you've got to take some things off your plate, you've got to be kinder to yourself and stop trying to keep all of the plates spinning. Otherwise you're going to invariably head towards a disaster zone where you really are going to start to move into breakdown or sincere exhaustion or allostatic load or whatever. So I think the shaman also reminds us that one of the things that could exacerbate feelings of exhaustion or overwhelm is really listening to the ego, letting the ego tell us that we've got to do all of this stuff and we're not allowed to admit that we need to slow down or that we need to take some things off of our plate. Instead, go to the intuition, go to your deep instinct, listen to your higher self, whatever language you like to use and whatever framework you are particularly interested in. I'm sure you know what I mean. It's the difference between letting your ego decide how much you've got to do and then letting your spirit tell you, letting your higher self, your deep knowing, whatever the case may be, whatever the weather. Those two things, they're going to tell you different stuff sometimes. The ego might drive you into the fucking breeding ground, because the ego wants to be seen a certain way. The ego wants to present a certain thing, and the ego might not want to admit that the body and the mind need to slow down. So ask yourself, what does the intuition say? Tune into that. And that's another important reason why spiritual practice should not necessarily be so deprioritized that it's barely even factored in, because it's through spiritual practice that a great many of us, the kinds of people that watch my videos anyway, receive their deep insights that come from the core of themselves. And those deep insights will tell you what it is that you really need, rather than letting your ego boss you around and dictate to you. So I'm going to go ahead and do another little shuffle, and this time we're going to have a look at actions that you can take to try to decrease the level of overwhelm or stress, actions that you can take to put you in a position of greater power and less negative pressure. I do like to say negative pressure when I can and when I remember to, rather than pressure, because I do believe that there is such a thing as healthy pressure that we can decide to place ourselves under, so that we can, you know, turn ourselves into a diamond. You know, a diamond is made through a great deal of pressure. So I do think that there is such a thing as positive pressure. There is such a thing as self-chosen pressure that is designed to empower us and test us and push us out of our comfort zone. But of course, certainly pressure also has a lot of negative connotations and a lot of shadow stuff attached to it as well. And this video is more about the kind of pressure that is really not helpful, it is not advantageous, and it's the kind of pressure that needs to be owned up to and dealt with. So let's have a look at what kinds of actions we could potentially be taking. The card that's come through here is suspension, and this would ordinarily be the Hanged Man in most tarot decks, the suspension card. And I think this is really very clear. Immediately right off the bat, we are thinking about taking that pause. We are thinking about stepping away, even just for a few minutes, and really connecting with what is important, and reconnecting with the priorities, and reconnecting with self. If we've gotten to the point where we've convinced ourselves that we cannot even take a few moments to just collect our thoughts and get a sense of what is the most important next right action, then we really have gone massively awry. And we do need to be honest with ourselves about the extent to which we might be afraid to have that little pocket of time. Are we afraid to have that window of time where we can just collect our thoughts and come back to ourselves and connect with the priorities again? Sometimes we keep our lives very, very busy, very overwhelming, very high stress, because we don't actually want to get caught in the quiet. We're running away from the quiet. We're running away from that pocket of time where we could have real contemplation, because we don't want to actually experience what's in there. We don't want to go into that room of quietness and stillness because we are afraid of what is going to greet us once we get inside. So I think really what the suspension card is asking you is, first of all, when was the last time you had a few minutes to collect your thoughts, take some deep breaths? No matter how minimal that time is, there's got to be some. Okay, there's got to be someone that can hold the baby for a few minutes while you go into another room or take a walk around the block and just really clear your mind and get back to a sense of what is supposed to be happening, and, you know, really just kind of connecting with the strength in the core of you. When was the last time that you did that for you? And how badly do you need it right now? What the suspension card is also asking is it possible that your life right now is looking overwhelming or stressful or very sort of high pressure because you've designed it that way, because you are actually running from what would greet you if you were allowed to stop and be in stillness and be in contemplation? Sometimes the fear of something can really be addressed when you have some time to address it, and when you have some quiet and some stillness to address it. And you may therefore pack your life full of different things, full of different, you know, duties and activities and plans that you've made and chores and all kinds of things. And as much as you may complain about those things and insist that you do not want to have this many things, you've actually set your life up that way because you're afraid of confronting the fear that you will have the time and the energy to confront if you took some of those things off your plate. For other people, it's unhappiness that they're running from. There are so many people who fill their lives full of different duties and activities and relationships, people they've got to see, and it's really just a big stack of duties and pressures, and they don't want to get rid of those things really, because it would mean that they would have to address that they're unhappy with their relationship, or they're unhappy with their physical health and well-being, or they're unhappy with their career but they feel very fearful of beginning another career journey. So I think sometimes we're afraid to be caught in the quiet, and we're afraid to allow ourselves to have access to that experience that is so well illustrated by the suspension card, the experience of being in the stillness, coming back to self, coming back to center. Is it possible that you're running away from that experience? And is it possible that you now need to take a deep breath and let yourself have that experience? And perhaps if you are someone who's been filling your life full of things to the point where you're overwhelmed or you're burnt out and you're stressed, and you've started to realize that it's because you're afraid of confronting something within, then maybe you are not ready to confront it on your own yet, but maybe you could have a frank conversation with someone about it, either on a personal level or on a professional level, and, you know, allow somebody to hold space for you to really connect with that fear or that unhappiness or that uncertainty that you might be running from. I do think that for some of us, we doth protest too much when it comes to the amount of stress, the amount of pressure, the amount of obligation that we've got in our lives. Sometimes we do need to look at the amount of stuff that is stacked up on our plate, mountain high, and think to ourselves, have I put that there intentionally because I'm afraid of what I would have to confront if those things weren't there? And I think this is very true of people who are afraid to start a creative practice or a spiritual practice, actually. It's very convenient how there's always one more chore to do. There's always one more person to speak to. There's always one more thing that needs to be done. When at the end of all of those things, if they would only finish, you would finally have time to paint that canvas. You would finally have time to do that ritual or that shamanic journey. Isn't it funny how there's always something in front that means that we can't do the thing that maybe we're afraid of doing, the potentially life-changing thing that we've been putting off and putting off? It's very convenient to be able to blame things like stress and pressure and mounting responsibilities and no time, no time, no time. Isn't it funny how sometimes we steal time from ourselves? We box it away and convince ourselves that we can't have it because we're actually afraid of what would change for us if we gave it to ourselves and let ourselves do the thing we might be afraid of doing. I'm having myself a little peppermint pit stop Pop-Tart. Did you witness my alliteration? Alliteration, it's a sensation for all the nation. Ugh. That was a very intense action card. You know, you're really being asked to give yourself some time away from the responsibilities. And I'm not talking about like booking a hotel room for a week and having a proper holiday and really decompressing. That might not be at all realistic for you. I know at the moment it's not at all realistic for me, but I do know that sometimes I tell myself I've barely got time to crap or breathe. And actually, is that the case? Is that really the case? Do I need to be telling myself that? Or do I need to just pull away for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, set an alarm, you know, if you really are that time poor, or you're really convincing yourself it's not important to have that time to realign with yourself, realign with your priorities, set an alarm, and just for that time, confirm for yourself, right, what is really important? And what am I aiming towards, and what do I want to have done by the end of the day, and what is not important, what can be placed onto the back burner, and what is really important to me deep down in my soul, you know, what do I really need to address and focus on and let myself head towards. And you might want to do it with a pen and paper, write some notes down as you start to get clearer on what it is that's important and what would be a realistic use of your time for the day. And as I said, if you feel like you're running away from heartbreak or unhappiness or fear by stacking loads of things into your life that you're convincing yourself you have to do, then you might want to confront that with somebody else present. I'm going to use the final card in this Tea and Tarot episode to really call forth an encouraging message from Spirit, something that might be really useful to some of us who are going through burnout, overwhelm, stress, pressure. What do we need to know from Spirit that can really just lift us up, elevate us, and make us feel like we can get back to a point where things feel more manageable and we feel like we have some semblance of control again? The card that has come through for this encouraging message, and this is a card position that I often include in my readings, is Young Gourd. Young Gourd, and Young Gourd is ordinarily Knight of Cups in most tarot decks. One thing about this particular archetype in tarot, Knight of Cups or Young Gourd in this particular interpretation, is that very often this figure is a figure of empathy, and it's a figure that often reaches out in order to connect with the experiences of other people. Young Gourd usually offers something. I feel like in most decks with Knight of Cups imagery, there's the offering of the cup, and it's almost a kind of ceremonial but still very open and giving offering. In the Dust II Onyx tarot imagery, I feel that it's more an offering of the vulnerability of young Gord. It's an honesty, it is an emotional openness that's there in the face in the card. And I tend to feel that this is a representation of how useful it is to have empathy with others who feel similarly. And to be honest with you, you're not going to be able to swing a dead cat, honey bunny, without hitting somebody in the face who has also experienced stress, pressure, overwhelm, exhaustion, fatigue. Connect with people, talk to people about it, talk to people in your life about it, talk to people online about it. Go in search of that sense of empathy and that sense of connection, the shared experiences that tend to strengthen us all to understand that this is a part of our human experience. We're not just going through it alone. Other people have gone through it as well. And there are so many different tips and techniques and ideas out there about what to do if you are experiencing stress or overwhelm. So reach out for that information, request that information, and then take the opportunity to allow the person who gave you that information to feel useful and to feel thanked for it. You know, show your gratitude towards that person for giving you their perspective as well. Sometimes this particular archetype in tarot can remind you that it's okay to reach out for help, and it can remind you of the times that you've offered help to somebody else in the past and how it's okay to ask for reciprocity in some regard. If you know that you've been there for somebody through their tough times, give them an opportunity to be there for you through yours. Express that you are feeling overwhelmed. Maybe try to ask if you can get some assistance from somebody with something that you had convinced yourself you had to do on your own. You know, reach out, let people know that you can't do it all on your own, or that you need more time for it, or whatever the case may be. Request empathy, request understanding, and request reciprocity where you have given to people in the past. There's nothing wrong with asking for that to be in some way returned from time to time. Everybody goes through difficult times. It's not just you giving to everybody else indefinitely. There comes a point where you need to seek assistance, or you need to delegate, or you need to ask for support, and maybe that time has come to you. Maybe that time is upon you right now. I want to draw your attention to some of the shadow aspects of young Gord. Young Gord can sometimes be a figure who requires reassurance, or feels anyway that they require fairly constant reassurance. They want to know they're doing the right thing. They want to feel that people around them are approving of them, and people around them are pleased with what they're doing and pleased with the progress they're making, or pleased with what they are giving essentially to others. And it's really important that you have a look at the areas of pressure and stress which have led to feelings of fatigue or overwhelm, and ask yourself, have you been putting any of that pressure on yourself in order to seek approval from others? Are you doing it because you are a people pleaser? Are you doing it because you think it's what people want or expect from you? And is it time now to make a reassessment on that? Is it time to acknowledge that when you try too hard to please others, or to receive reassurance from them, or to receive praise from them, you actually end up essentially screwing yourself over in the end? And is it time for you to have a serious talk with yourself about whether or not that can really continue? Because you should be able to spend your time as you want and spend your energy as you want without feeling like you constantly need others to validate those choices. And indeed, if there's anyone in your life who tends to withhold approval from you until you do what they want you to do to get that approval, then you might also need to assess the relationship and the strength of that relationship as well, and how much energy you're giving to that relationship, and whether or not it can continue as it has been doing. Honey bunnies, I have absolutely loved going through these cards with you for this tea and tarot episode, and I have very much enjoyed my basic but classic peppermint infusion. Bleeding gorgeous, absolutely lovely. Honey bunnies, thank you so much for joining me for Tea and Tarot. Don't forget, if you want to receive a tarot reading from me, you know where I am. I will leave the link down below to my shop. As usual, you can always find my online store. Go over and take a look at my offerings. I'm going to leave the link to my brand new offering down below as well. It's called the wish list reading, and it basically helps you to get clear on the different actions that you can take to move closer into alignment to the various things that you've got on your wish list. So I'm really excited about that new reading option, so I'll definitely leave that down below, but I'll also just leave the entire store down below so you can take a look at what other things are going on. As always, I have a massive collection of different readings, so come and grab one if you feel called. So much love until next time, baby cakes, and blessed be.